If you ever feel like your emotions are bottled up inside of you, like they're sitting in your body and you can feel them in there, but they're not moving. I also know that feeling really well. And today I'm going to share how we can actually help our bodies to move through a state like that and process our emotions more fluidly. My name is Ashley. Live at Your Edge is a channel where I talk about how we relate to our inner experiences, and specifically how we can build the skill sets and self-knowledge that we need to grow and evolve and expand into the next version of ourselves that we're meant to become. I personally spent many years in a very emotionally blocked state where all of my emotions felt like they were kind of muted, like muffled almost. They were there, but they were very hard for me to access. Over the course of my healing journey, especially after working with some really gifted somatic teachers, like teachers that taught a lot of body-based practices, what I discovered was that my heart center, my heart chakra, was very armored and blocked. The chakras are energy centers in our body where a lot of energy and emotional energy moves through. So the crown chakra is at the top of our head. We have the third eye chakra, the throat chakra, the heart chakra, the solar plexus, the sacral chakra, and our root chakra, which is at the very base of our spine. And so these chakras are places where a lot of energy and emotion move through. Sometimes our energy centers can become really blocked. A lot of kind of emotional debris can get stuck or accumulate in these different energy centers. And so over time, what had happened to me is that my body had built these layers of protective armoring around my heart space. And this is really fascinating to me because this is not just energetic. There's a lot going on when this happens. It affects the energy flow, it affects the intensity of the emotion, the actual sensation, my actual physical chest internally, and like the sensation that I had when I touched the outside of my chest was like very desensitized. It was very numb feeling. I didn't have a lot of sensation here in this part of my body. After years of studying this, not only in myself, but through teachers, through reading, through all the study that I've done on our energy systems in the body, I now know that this kind of heart armoring or heart protection is something that we all do to some degree. This is an adaptive thing that happens. This happens as a result of just living through a life that has some painful experiences in it, and it is designed to make living through painful experiences more bearable. And so even though it's protective, the problem with it, of course, is that over time, as this happens unconsciously, our emotions start to not move as readily through that part of our body. And we don't actually get to experience the full, vibrant richness of our emotional experience. Over the course of my own journey over the last 9 years, I have had the opportunity to learn a lot of different heart softening practices that were very powerful for me. It was through this process that I discovered that crying is one of the most powerful medicines available to us in healing. Unfortunately, in our culture, a lot of times we are taught that crying is something that we do in a moment of weakness or like something we do when we've lost control of ourselves. We are not usually taught that crying is actually a critical and basic function of our bodies, or that it's essential for us to actually be able to live a vibrant emotional life. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how crying actually works in our bodies and why crying is such great medicine. So crying is important for both our nervous system regulation as well as our emotional integration. Science shows that emotional crying is actually a nervous system reset for humans. So it happens after emotional tension accumulates, and then even though it does activate our sympathetic nervous system at first, after we finish crying, it actually activates our parasympathetic nervous system, which is the rest and digest nervous system, and the way that our body relaxes and calms down. Research also suggests that crying is part of how we integrate our emotional experiences. So it occurs when we shift from overwhelm into processing. It marks the transition into emotional integration. And so what's so powerful about it is that it allows a state change of our emotions instead of them staying frozen in our bodies. And so the scientific understanding of crying really aligns with my own personal experiences with crying as part of healing during my own journey, and my own understanding of how crying affects us, which is that it's a critically important step in how we move from one state to another. And that it's part of the flow of our emotional system when we've been experiencing something painful or intense or emotional. One of my favorite spiritual teachers, Kyle Cease, often says that when we cry, the idea we have about who we were, our old beliefs, our old ways of being emotionally attached to things, literally falls out of our body. And I love that so much because it's so visually vivid and concrete. It's very tangible. And I really think he's right. Crying is the release of energy that needs to move through us. And I've spoken before here on Live at Your Edge about how when our emotions are avoided, when they're suppressed or pushed down, this can really cause a lot of trapped energy to become stuck, and eventually it can stagnate in our bodies. I really think about crying as one of the natural things that our bodies want to do when they've been processing our emotions, especially things like fear, grief, shame, and anger. And that when we don't cry, our emotions might stagnate in our emotional system and it can become sluggish. Depending on what your upbringing was and where you are on your own journey, you might find that crying comes to you really easily, or you might find that it is impossible and that you just can't cry ever. That's also really common. Or you might be somewhere in between these two extremes. I just want to acknowledge how insanely intense a lot of our conditioning is around crying. In our culture, especially for male people, there's a lot of shame and often trauma that is experienced during our childhoods around crying. It's often taught not to be a masculine thing to do. It's taught to be weakness. And I just want to acknowledge how potent that kind of trauma and shaming can be. And so if you're there, it's okay. This can be retrained. We can work through our conditioning and our wounding. So let's talk about how we can actually open our heart spaces. The first thing I want to talk about is softening practices. So our heart space, our heart chakra, is the place where we feel the most tenderness, softness, emotionality, sadness, grief. Our hearts experience so much of our emotional life. And so it means that living in the world is an intense experience, and our hearts do tend to get closed down and armored sometimes from just living in a world that has painful experiences in it. And so I kind of like to think of it like a walled medieval city. If you've ever seen those medieval cities in Europe that are completely walled off, like a fortress, that's kind of how I like to think of the armoring around the heart. So what we're doing when we begin to practice de-armoring our hearts is we're bringing a lot of intention and consciousness toward softening, towards peeling away those layers. And so what softening can look like is often putting our hand on our hearts, using things like gentle strokes, rubbing our hands over our hearts, deep breaths, and bringing as much softness and tenderness and love there through our consciousness that we can. There's a few practices that I think really help with this. One is visualization. Some of my favorites are picturing golden light or white light, maybe even a soft pink light, whatever kind of thing feels good to you, coming in, melting or dissolving away some of that protection. One thing that can also be really powerful here is asking for help from the divine, from the field, from nature, from our guides, from whoever, because asking for help fundamentally shifts something inside of us into more of a receiving posture. And that shift alone can actually be really profound when we do something like this. There's a lot of territory to explore here with visualization. You can visualize different archetypes, different divine archetypes, like different threads of the divine consciousness coming in and putting their hands on your heart. There are a ton of practices here that you can do, a lot of territory to explore. The second thing is movement. When visualization is paired with movement, this can be really, really powerful. So things like opening the chest can be a really profound shift. We tend to get in a state where our chests are very collapsed, very closed down from looking at devices all the time. And so helping the actual tissue and muscle and fascia in that area to relax and expand can be a really, really good practice. Doing things like laying all the way back, sort of draping yourself over like a yoga block or a meditation cushion or a pillow of some kind, and just letting gravity open the chest can be really wonderful here. Sometimes using a lacrosse ball or some other kind of massage can really do a lot to release and relax those tissues. Doing the actual heart opening, chest opening motions during the visualization too, to kind of help invite the light in, can be really powerful. If you are a person who wears a bra or any kind of restrictive clothing around the chest area, removing that can be so incredibly powerful. I kid you not. It is amazing to me how just having tight clothing can really enhance the restrictive, closed quality that our heart spaces can have sometimes. Removing our shirts entirely also, being completely bare-chested, can also be really helpful because it creates more of a sense of vulnerability and openness and sensitivity in us. Using our hands as well to help to really sweep away, like physically sweep away some of the energetic armoring that we have there, using a motion that's more like pulling threads, energetic threads out of the heart can be really good. There's a lot of stuff we can do to physically support ourselves in de-armoring this space. Now, if you're somebody who feels like you're at a place where you really haven't cried in a long time, this is not something that's accessible to you, then it may also help to do things like giving yourself some emotional fuel for bringing emotion into the heart space. So things like listening to pieces of music, watching scenes from a film, being around an animal that makes you feel really tender, anything that really sort of causes you to feel any kind of emotion. And then using that as a practice for letting yourself just sink fully into that emotional experience instead of what we are often used to doing, which is kind of like pushing that experience away, trying to get past that moment. Like really, usually we're used to kind of pushing those emotions away and instead using that opportunity to really get deep into it and combining it with these other practices can be really helpful. One of my biggest suggestions actually for opening our heart chakras and expanding our access to crying is finding teachers who can actually do guided practices, specifically heart-opening practices. This can really be so supportive, especially in the beginning when we may have some fear around opening this space. One of my favorite teachers for somatic work, including for heart work, is Sabrina Lynn of Rewilding. I think she has some really amazing content that you can find online. But it can be anyone that you resonate with. Anyone that does some heart-opening practices, some guided meditations can be so helpful with this. I really don't think there's a replacement for that. And so this kind of stuff is really just the tip of the iceberg, but these are the foundations that got me to a place where my heart space opened and became sensitive again and able to have emotion flow more fluidly through it again. When I started, I felt like there were so many clogs, so much thick armoring that for me, it took years of practicing before I was open enough that I had access to crying and I could just cry when an emotion came up for me. Everyone is going to be different, but I just want to normalize the fact that it can take a really long time For someone like me who's really sensitive, the amount of armoring that I had to work through was really, really huge. I'll also just share that my heart, even though it is a lot more open than it used to be, it ebbs and flows. It goes through phases where it's more open. It goes through phases where it's closed and things are stagnating a little bit more. And sometimes I'll eventually notice that and do some work to regain some access and flow in that area, because life will continue to happen. This isn't the kind of thing where once it's open, it just stays open, because life keeps happening. And so it's something that's like a continually changing thing. It's not ever static. And probably the best maintenance is to do daily or weekly practices in this space, bringing our consciousness, bringing our warmth and our love and our invitations to open this space can be such incredibly wonderful, like maintenance of our aliveness. And I will just share that for myself, after I started to do this, I couldn't believe the change in my quality of life, how much richer life felt to me and continues to feel, how much more aliveness there is. I just could not believe that just this one space, the heart chakra, I mean, for me, it's been one of the most powerful healing processes of my life, is healing this heart space. And so I'm curious how that is for you. How does your heart space feel to you? I would love to hear in the comments what kinds of things work for you. What do you tend to like to do if you feel blocked or stuck in your own emotional states? I really hope that you found this video helpful to you in your own journey. And if you want more guidance around this, I would suggest watching this video next, which is about how to create emotional safety in the body and invite our emotions to come up and through us more easily. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you next time.